Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter all over the country and across the world. We've plenty coming up. We'll be discussing the asylum plan, the Rwanda package, but also the state of the opposition parties, newspapers and broadcasters. There's lots of criticism, but are there any alternatives? And of course, we'll have the latest from Ukraine. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's just past midday. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary have been banned from entering Russia. The country's foreign ministry announced that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ben Wallace are all barred, along with 10 other British government members and politicians. They say unprecedented hostile action by the British government, particularly sanctions against senior Russian officials, is the reason behind the move, with further names to be added later. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. That's as further explosions have been heard throughout the capital Kyiv and the western city Lviv, and also in the southern city of Mariupol. Efforts are underway to evacuate Ukrainian civilians through 9 humanitarian corridors today. The mayor of Trostyanets says authorities are investigating mass graves in the Sumy area.
We don't have exact information, but a lot of people are missing. Right now, we're trying to find out if they are imprisoned or dead. We are finding mass graves, and it's not clear who dug them. An exhumation will take place. At the moment, there are at least 50 dead. Some of them were just shot on the street. Some were found with tied hands, eyes taped. We found people in villages shot in the head.
The Home Secretary says other countries, including Denmark, could follow the UK's Rwanda asylum plan. Priti Patel made the comment despite reports of a civil service backlash over the reforms. There have also been warnings from the United Nations Refugee Agency that the plans are in breach of international law. Dr. Greg Mills, a former strategic advisor to the president of Rwanda, says the decision is concerning.
Well, I think it's a highly transactional response to the refugee crisis in the UK, and essentially you're putting the responsibility on another country. It has an appalling human rights record. It ranks with 22 points out of 100, for instance, on Freedom House's index on political freedoms, which puts it in about the same space as Russia, for instance.
Health officials are warning people not to eat Kinder chocolate linked to a salmonella outbreak in Belgium. 70 people in the UK so far have been affected. An assessment released by the European Food Safety Authority says it matched the same salmonella strain taken from a factory last December. The UK Health Security Agency has issued the alert for Kinder Surprise, Kinder Mini Eggs and Kinder Chocobons. 1 in 7 teachers have experienced sexism at work, with 59% citing harassment coming from a pupil. The National Association of Schoolmasters Union of Women Teachers will debate the problem of so-called incel culture in schools at its annual conference in Birmingham today. Chair for the Campaign for Real Education, Chris McGovern, told GB News he thinks children need to be held more accountable.
If children cross a line, they know there has to be some sort of punishment, and if necessary, that should be exclusion. No, we can't throw boys onto the scrap heap because they're being misogynist. They've got to be looked after as well. But we do have to protect girls. We have to protect other groups in the school. So really, this is about leadership, and we should throw away some of these liberal ideas about, oh, we're always going to put the child first.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex will make a televised address at the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games in the Netherlands later today. It follows visits on Thursday to meet the Queen and the Prince of Wales in Windsor. Harry and Meghan's arrival at the Games marked the couple's first public appearance together in Europe since they quit as senior working royals more than 2 years ago. Royal commentator Ingrid Seward told GB News it could be the first step in rebuilding their relationship with the royal family.
Whatever you might think of Harry and Meghan, we all rather hope so, that the family will embrace them again. But I'm not sure about Prince William. I think that probably goes a bit deeper. And I know that Prince Charles is very hurt, but it's his son. It wasn't like we imagine a sort of long meeting. I would think it was an exchange of pleasantries, because that's the royal way, but with the undertone of mending bridges.
Ingrid Seward there. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's go back to Alistair.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, controversy continues to surround the government's plan to send asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. But what are the alternative solutions? Have you heard any? As Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other senior ministers are banned from entering Russia over the UK's hostile stance on the war in Ukraine, we'll be speaking to a military expert to get all of the very latest on the conflict and the new overnight threats. And Partygate is still bubbling away, with reports the Prime Minister's been airbrushed out of leaflets for the local elections, as polling finds that 2/3 of Brits think he should resign if he's issued with more fines. Now, as always, I want to hear from you. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We are also on Twitter, as indeed am I, and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can see previous programmes and keep up to date with everything that's going on. Now, when the Prime Minister unveiled his and Priti Patel's plan to ship folk to Rwanda who'd arrived here on small boats or in the back of lorries seeking asylum or just a better life, it was greeted by a cacophony of condemnation from opposition leaders via the voluntary groups working in the sector to one or two Liberal Conservatives. The plans were condemned as inhumane, unworkable, rather expensive, and nothing more than a dead cat ploy to distract from the Prime Minister's other difficulties, like receiving a fixed penalty notice over a breach of the COVID rules. The media were pretty united in their condemnation too. Newspapers, who are of course free to be transparently partisan, but also most of the broadcast media, who frankly should know better. But few, if any, serious alternatives were offered. Now, is that because the opposition parties don't have an alternative plan, or don't accept that this has become a real problem? A couple of old friends of mine, Mark Seddon, the former editor of Tribune, Labour-supporting magazine, and Kate Hoey, a former Labour MP and minister, said they'd been warning Labour for years that this was an issue that needed addressing. So today, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm delighted to be joined by a former Lib Dem Home Office minister, a couple of former Tory ministers, and a senior Guardian political correspondent to examine what the opposition and the media are up to. A Tory government with a majority just short of 80 is not a dictatorship, whatever you may have read or heard. But a government with no real, thoughtful or constructive opposition is much more dangerous. My fear is that that is where we are right now. Also this afternoon, as Ukraine seems to have slipped into a frightening waiting game, with Putin determined, it seems, to score some sort of victory, however bloody, by the great celebration day of May the 9th, I'll be talking to a man who really does know his stuff. Retired Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander and former Ministry of Defence Director General. But as always, I want to hear your thoughts on Rwanda, the state of the opposition parties, the newspapers, the broadcasters, and yes, on Ukraine. Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us on GB News, or you can tweet me direct. I'm delighted to say that here, live with me in the studio, is Norman Baker and Aubrey Allegretti. Norman is the Member of Parliament for Lewis and a former minister himself, and Aubrey Allegretti is a senior political correspondent with The Guardian newspaper. Also joining in our conversation down the line is the former Conservative minister, Anne Widdecombe. There she is in all of her glory. Anne, great to see you. Just a very quick one to get going and to make sure also that it all works. What's your reaction to the Kremlin having banned Boris Johnson from Russia? Not that I think he had any plans of going there, but one or two people are already saying it's a badge of honour.
Well, indeed. I don't think we need to be too concerned about that. I don't imagine Boris had any intentions to visit Russia in the near future. And I think it's recognition, the fact that he's chosen to ban Boris is recognition of the huge role that Boris has been playing in helping the Ukraine. So, great. I think Boris can be very proud of this.
We're going to start talking about Rwanda and migration, and I'll bring you back in. You should be able to hear Norman, who I know you know very well, and Aubrey as well. Do make it clear when you want to come in, and they may well want to come back to you. It's the four of us in open debate. Norman, let me start with you on the Rwanda plan. Your party leader, Sir Ed Davey, dismissed it as a cynical distraction. And yet the latest polling, which is in this morning's Daily Mail, shows that 21% of Lib Dems support it.
Well, you know, you shouldn't cut your conscience to fit the shear's clothing, if that's what the public at large think. But I don't think it's true. I mean, my respect for the public has gone up because of the way they've responded to the Ukrainian crisis, the willingness to accept refugees in this country who are faced with losing their lives, being tortured. These are the people who are by and large arriving in this country, whether they're coming by boat or any other means. We have an international obligation in law to receive people who are not, by the way, illegal immigrants. They are people who arrive claiming refugee status. At that point, it should be determined.
But the same poll, and I take your point about respecting the public view, the same poll suggests that over 80% of people are concerned to make a clear distinction between those who are asylum seekers,
yes,
refugees,
yes,
fleeing crisis, and those who are bluntly economic migrants looking for a better deal.
Well, I agree with that. But what happens is when people arrive here, they should be processed very quickly. Their intentions and positions should be examined. If they are genuine refugees, it should be processed quickly and allowed to integrate into the country. If they're not, they can be returned. And the problem has arisen over many years, and I will know this as a former Home Office Minister, as I do, is the Home Office is deeply slow at processing applications. So people are left in limbo for months and months, and the numbers grow.
Anne Widdecombe, answer Norman's point. You've worked there, as has he. Could they have done better without involving Rwanda?
Rwanda solution is a good one. Yes, I've got certain reservations about human rights, but I think that can be addressed. After all, this is a process we're paying, so we can call the tune on treatment, and we can make sure that there are regular inspections. So I think Rwanda is a good idea. Norman is right to say that the processing of asylum applications is, and has been for many years, phenomenally slow. But one of the reasons for that is that they're not in detention, that they're not somewhere where we know where they are. The message that we send out to the world is, because we don't practice detention, we don't have national identity cards, and the message we send out to the world is, if you can succeed in getting into Britain, it's very, very, very minimal chance indeed that you will ever be removed, because it's the easiest country in the world, which is why they come here, to disappear and to go into the black economy.
All right. Aubrey, you're not here to represent either the Liberal Democrat Party, Norman can do that more than effectively, nor are you here to represent the Labour Party. I want to make that crystal clear from the outset. But you are here to represent the Guardian newspaper that embraces both of those positions more likely than they would embrace Anne Widdecombe's position. That same polling that I mentioned there to Norman suggests that 15% of Labour voters also think that the plan that Anne Widdecombe says is in the main OK, but needs a few tweaks here and there. And yet your newspaper and a lot of the liberal media simply said, it's a nonsense, it's humane, reject it. Public out there aren't getting very well served by you guys, are they?
Well, obviously, there is a split of opinion. It's not very clear-cut. There are people on the Conservative side that disagree with the policy. There are people on the Liberal side who disagree with the policy. And I suspect that people's views will change as we find out quite a lot more about the actual detail of this. Yeah. So, for example, when the first flights will be, exactly how people are going to be separated, so which women and children and men you're not going to include in the people that we send to Rwanda. So I suspect that really this is something that the public feels needs dealing with. Yeah. But actually, the practical implementation of the policy itself will be much more interesting to see.
But did anybody feel your collar whisper in your ear, either from Norman's party or from the Labour Party, saying, look, this Tory plan's are nonsense, it's expensive? Andrew Mitchell was very crystal clear about his criticism, and he's a Tory MP, and say, look, if we were in power, either Labour in majority or Labour working together with the Liberal Democrats or the SNP, this is what we would do. Because I did not see a word of that anywhere.
There has been a noticeable sort of quietness about certain parts of criticism of the plan, right? So from the Labour Party, they obviously want to look at the detail. They can completely understand that, right?
But Mark Seddon and Kate Hoey said we've been doing that for 20 years.
Yes, and the
hardcore of the Labour Party thinks that open borders are progressive, internationalist, socialist.
And they will obviously feel quite uncomfortable that we are talking about an issue that we thought we'd sort of put to bed at the 2016 referendum when people of this country voted to leave the European Union. And the Conservatives are very keen to reopen that and say, we obviously can't control our borders properly until we ensure that those people who are arriving here via irregular routes are dealt with and, you know, made to feel as though there should be other alternatives, that they should only pursue the safe and legal routes that they are obviously pushing for on the left.
And do you accept that I'll ask my question then. No, come here. The timing looks cynical. You've had since 2016 to do it. Now the Prime Minister's in a bit of difficulty. Suddenly you do it. Anne Widdecombe. Timing cynical.
What?
Is the timing cynical? The Prime Minister's in difficulties. You've had 4 years to make a start on it. Why suddenly now?
Well, there's been about 25 years to make a start on this. I might remind you that when I was Shadow Home Secretary in 1999 to 2001, I proposed universal detention of all new asylum seekers. And Oliver Letwin, my successor, took it one stage further and actually proposed then, and that's at the turn of the century, he proposed that we should use offshore arrangements for processing asylum seekers to deter the abuse of the system. That is 20 years ago. So don't talk to me for the last 4 years. We've had COVID, we've got Ukraine, we've got massive things to deal with. But this has been hanging around through successive governments, Labour, Tory, coalition, unaddressed. I cheer that at last somebody's addressing it. Yes, there will be difficulties. I don't dispute that for a moment. It will take a while to shake down, but at last somebody's doing it.
I'm going to stick with Anne just for a moment, and then I want you, Norman, particularly to come back on her answer to what I say next. When you go back, Anne, into that period, you and I and Norman will very well remember the likes of Neil Kinnock, the likes of Tony Blair, Paddy Ashdown, Charlie Kennedy, opposition leaders who were big figures, who had big ideas, who said, if we're elected, this is what we do. What do you make of the current lot?
Not much, quite honestly. I mean, I think you're right. Even where people were very far to the left, people like Michael Foot, for example, a perfectly cranky manifesto, but they did have presence and they were listened to a certain extent. I mean, I do not know what Keir Starmer stands for. I mean, I knew what Neil Kinnock stood for and hated it, but I do not know what Starmer stands for. And everybody said, oh, yippee, you know, we've got somebody moderate, somebody intelligent, somebody reasonable. What does he stand for? What, for example, is his answer to this? What is he going to do to stop the abuse of the asylum system across the Channel? What is he going to do? Tell us that before just criticising what the Conservatives are doing.
I've got Lord John Mann, who you all know as well, coming on at the end of the programme, and I promise, Anne, I will ask him specifically that question. But I said I wanted to come to you on that. I said in my introduction, I'm not saying Rwanda good, bad, indifferent, over costly. I've listened very carefully to what you've said, what Anne said, and I've read very clearly what Andrew Mitchell and others, even within the Conservative Party, have said. But that's my key point, is that your leader, Sir Ed Davey, and Sir Keir Starmer leading Labour, are not leaders of stature who can say, this not only stinks and is inhumane, but here's what we would do right now. And we're going to put someone like Norman in charge of it because he used to work in the Home Office. He knows where the bodies are buried. It just doesn't look impressive. And that's the real danger to a functioning democracy.
Well, oppositions, of course, are there predominantly to critique the government of the day rather than to form their own policies and put them forward. But nevertheless, having said that, oppositions, I think, need to plant flags and stand by them and say this is what we stand for. And the evidence from the past is you don't simply win elections by waiting for the government of the day to fall apart. You win elections partly by looking credible and having policies people think are right.
But last time your party really made a mark in terms of a specific policy promise ahead of a general election was penny on income tax for education. And that did capture the public imagination. That was a specific proposal. It wasn't just a criticism of spending on education. No. It's what we would do if we were in power.
Well, I agree with that. And also, Paddy was very courageous, for example, about Hong Kong at the time, if you remember. We also led the opposition in Parliament to the Iraq War. So, yes, you have to take positions which are principled.
Yeah.
Sometimes they look to be unpopular at the time, but if you don't stand for what you believe in, what are you there for?
Does it confuse someone like you, and I don't mean that sarcastically or tongue-in-cheek, that Anne said, I don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. I do, on economics, because he and Rachel Reeves and the team before her have been crystal clear that in the current cost of living crisis, whether it's right or wrong, they would hit the oil companies with a windfall tax, and that would fund hundreds of pounds for the poorest people and maybe even give a boost to universal credit or whatever it might be. They can be clear on economics. Why can they not be clear on something as sensitive as immigration?
Well, hopefully they will be, and obviously Parliament's in recess this week. And that's
do you probe them? Do you press them?
They won't be, actually.
Well, I mean, you hope that when Parliament comes back from recess and this whole plan is announced, that then we will get a chance to hear from these people, and Labour will know that they cannot just sit back and wait for the government to fall apart, that they have to prove to people that there is a reason to vote for them and that they understand the issues that have dominated politics for the last 4 years since the referendum and longer before. So I'm sure they will.
Can I tell you why they won't, I'm afraid, is that Labour has calculated they have to win back red wall seats in the north. They assume, perhaps correctly, I don't know, that this is a touchstone issue for those seats. And if they seem to be, inverted commas, soft on this, they will not win those seats back. That's why they're keeping their heads down. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, there is a tricky line to a tightrope to walk, isn't there? So we're not.
So Anne Widdecombe, Aubrey as a political correspondent, and Norman as a frontline functioning Liberal Democrat say, watch this space. As someone who's been in this game for a good deal of time, been through the ups and downs, is it Tory party thinking, in your understanding, that we can just carry on as Tories with what we're doing at the moment, and it'll be all right on the night?
Well, I wish they would carry on as Tories, because if they were carrying on as Tories, we wouldn't be having tax hikes. And one of the reasons that I haven't rejoined the Conservative Party is that I don't think they are actually carrying on as Tories, quite honestly. But yes, I mean, you make a point, because quite inevitably, when governments have a lot of trouble, they will tend to take the view, look, let's deal with what we've got to deal with now, and, let that play out. And most people actually in the very centre of politics do understand that today's polls are not necessarily tomorrow's polls, and that 2 years before the next election is actually quite a long time.
That's fascinating, because that nods with respect to both Aubrey's analysis and Norman. Final question, and you preempt it brilliantly by saying polls are polls are polls. But there is one poll as well I want to mention, which I'm sure you've seen in the Times newspaper this morning, that says around 2/3 of people out there, and they're the only ones who matter in all of this, say that if the Prime Minister is hit with another fixed penalty notice over Partygate, he should go. 2/3.
Well, I, for a start, don't think he should go. And with a war on at the moment, in which he's doing exceptionally well, I think it would be stupid to try and make him go. I also take the line that, quite honestly, if he'd sent out invitations to all and sundry, come to Downing Street, well, I'd be saying he's not fit for office. But he was simply having a slice of cake, most of which was uneaten, I gather, with a group of people with whom he'd been working all day. They'd been associating all day. If they sat round a conference table, that wasn't breaking the rules. The rules themselves were stupid. the inattention that was paid to how it could be presented was stupid. But quite honestly, compared with what's going on in the Ukraine, if Keir Starmer wants to go waffling on about Partygate and Partygate and Partygate, 2/3 of the public will eventually say, what is this all about? I mean, do we really want to change Prime Minister in the middle of the Ukraine crisis, particularly one who's doing as well as this one is doing, and who's now got the badge of honour? He's been banned by Putin.
And when it comes, stay where you are. We'll be coming back. We've got to take a break now and pick up with you to what Anne was just saying there as well. But we will be continuing the conversation after the break. Plenty of you already been getting in touch. Don't forget that you can get in touch with us via email or Twitter. David begins the conversation. Alistair, it's so very annoying when we hear different organisations condemning this country's plan to send illegal immigrants to Rwanda. No one comes up with an alternative. This country simply cannot carry on housing these illegals.
They're not illegal,
David,
by the way.
I was going to make that clarification. Their methodology may be illegal, unconventional, but until it's tested, that's a reasonable distinction, David. I think you've got to take on board. David concludes by saying, I fully support the government sending people to Rwanda. Nick, on email, we do not have an international obligation to accept illegals who blatantly breach our borders, sovereignty and laws. The United Nations have said overnight that they think we have breached it. And as the Prime Minister himself said when he announced the plan, he expects it to be tested in court as well. A tweet from Rolo. The root cause here is international law. Oh, there we are. That follows on from what Nick has just said. It motivates fake refugees to arrive by making it almost impossible to send them away. And finally, an email from Andrew. We need a comprehensive immigration system that involves kicking failed applicants out. If they know that they might not get to stay, that will be the best deterrent. Have I got time for one more? I have got time for one more. It's a tweet. It's from John. One solution would be to provide safe and legal routes for people to claim asylum in the UK so they are not forced to make the Channel crossing. Your point, precisely.
Yes. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I want to stress they're not illegal. They're seeking asylum. And until they're determined that they shouldn't qualify for asylum, then they're not illegal. And 2/3 of those who claim are allowed to stay because they are genuine refugees. The other third...
And that process makes the distinction we talked about at the very beginning.
The other third are required to leave.
Yeah. OK, Norman and Aubrey, stay exactly where you are. Anne will be there as well. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We have lots more coming up on today's programme, but first let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking sunny and warm for most, with a few coastal locations hanging on to cloud. Let's take a look at the details. For Plymouth and southwest England, it will be a warm and sunny afternoon, although some low cloud is likely to persist along windward coast in Cornwall, highs of 12 to 20 Celsius. Another warm and sunny afternoon for London and the southeast, although temperatures are not likely to be as high as they were on Friday afternoon. The afternoon will see some fair weather cloud bubble up across South Wales, but there'll also be plenty of warm sunshine to hand. Overall, a warm afternoon with highs of 20 or 21 Celsius. It's a similar picture for Manchester and the northwest of England, where the afternoon will see warm sunny spells, a little fair weather cloud and very pleasant temperatures peaking at 20 or 21. For northeast England, it'll be a touch breezy along the North Sea coast, where it'll be cooler, but inland away from that cooling wind, it will feel warm in the sunshine. Some cloud lingering along windward coast for Glasgow and southern Scotland, but most places staying dry with sunny spells through the afternoon. Temperatures peaking at a respectable 18 Celsius. Northern Ireland will also have a sunny afternoon, although with some cloud about, it'll be breezy too, but with winds coming from the south, it will feel warm. Staying dry this evening, but gradually turning cloudier in the west and rain creeping towards Northern Ireland. That's how it's shaping up.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 12:30 and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Thank you very much indeed for so doing. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including a detailed conversation with a former military commander about what's really going on in Ukraine. But before all of that, let's bring you right up to date with the news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 12:31. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary have been banned from entering Russia. The country's Foreign Ministry announced that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ben Wallace are all barred, along with 10 other British government members and politicians. They say hostile sanctions against senior Russian officials is the reason behind the move. President Zelensky says around 3,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed since the start of Russia's invasion. That's as further explosions have been heard throughout the capital Kyiv and the western city Lviv, and also in the southern city of Mariupol. Efforts are underway to evacuate Ukrainian civilians through 9 humanitarian corridors today. The Home Secretary says other countries could follow the UK's Rwanda asylum plan, as it was confirmed that 6,000 people have crossed the channel so far this year. Priti Patel made the comment despite reports of a civil service backlash over the reforms. There's also been warnings from the United Nations Refugee Agency that the plans breach international law. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will make a televised address at the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games in the Netherlands later on. It follows visits on Thursday to meet the Queen and the Prince of Wales in Windsor. Harry and Meghan's arrival at the Games marked the couple's first public appearance together in Europe since they quit as senior working royals. We're online, on TV and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and Friends.
Welcome back. It is 27 minutes to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. This afternoon we're discussing the Rwanda asylum plan, the state of the opposition parties, newspapers and indeed broadcasters, and of course we will have the latest from Ukraine. And I'm delighted to say that still with me here in the studio are former Lib Dem Minister Norman Baker and Guardian political correspondent Aubrey Allegretti, as well as Anne Widdecombe, who joins us. There she is, down in Kent. I'm going to come to you, Norman, to pick up on what Anne was saying just a moment ago, that the Partygate thing is a complete distraction. But in a funny sense, it leads me to this question, that if you cannot nail as an opposition, Lib Dem and Labour and SNP, if you like, a Prime Minister who stands accused of all of the things he stands accused, you're not up to the job?
Well, I think the police have nailed him for a start, haven't they, by issuing a fixed penalty notice, and there's more to come, apparently. So the rumours are. And this event...
He goes on television, he pays it, he apologises, he moves on.
Well, he moves on. He'll be... Look, I mean, the opposition hasn't got a majority in Parliament. The Conservatives have. Ultimately, before the next election, it's up to the Conservative MPs to deal with Boris. No one else can deal with him until the election comes. But I think it's disgraceful the way he's behaved. I'm not even talking about the fact he's broken his own rules on numerous occasions. I'm talking about the fact he's misled Parliament. Those of us who are ministers know very well the sanctity almost of having to be honest in Parliament. And if you make a mistake and tell an untruth, inadvertently or otherwise, you have to apologise to the House. You have to apologise and correct the record. The Prime Minister, I'm afraid, appears to be on the basis still that he's committed no offence. He didn't understand the law. Well, I'm sorry, ignorance is no defence against breaking the law.
And Widdicombe?
Well, first of all, he didn't say that he didn't understand the law. What he said was that he didn't think the gatherings were in breach of the law. His understanding was that they were not. And I used the distinction earlier on between inviting all and sundry and simply carrying on with people that you've been working with all day. And he says, and he said in Parliament, that the reason that he said there were no parties was because he thought that what he went to was a work event. And I actually understand that. And it is also worth pointing out what has been pointed out before, which is that Boris himself nearly died of COVID, and all the rules about his family not being able to see him, that was all thoroughly observed. What are we talking about? We're talking about people who've been working together all day, somebody's leaving, somebody's got a birthday, they have a bit of cake. I would bet quite a large sum of money that was going on in an awful lot of offices up and down the land, because people wouldn't have seen that as having a party.
That's only one event. There's many events, Anne.
And
yes.
Norman just said there were many events, but I want to, with all due respect to you, I'd want to put another question to you, Anne Widdicombe, if I may. And again, we are students of politics and of history of politics. And if you go right back to one of the most celebrated scandals, Jack Profumo and Christine Keeler and all of that, it wasn't the affair, or even that the woman is alleged to have been having an affair also with a Soviet agent. It was because he lied to the House. Now, yes. David Frost in the newspapers yesterday, a very close former ally of the Prime Minister, said he's got to stand up when the House returns and say, I got the wrong advice, I misunderstood the advice, I did err. Unless he clears the decks with a statement of that nature, even Frost says he's done for.
Well, I think effectively he's already said all of that. Profumo told a direct lie. Profumo, by the way, whom I have great respect for what he did subsequently and the way he redeemed himself. But he told a direct lie to the House of Commons, knowing fully well that he was lying at the time. Boris says he honestly thought it was a work event. That is different. That is completely different. And he has apologised umpteen times. My fear is he's going to go on apologising. I wish, for heaven's sake, we just all move on.
OK, final point to you, Aubrey. You've listened to two very lucid positions on this, but your pencil is sharpened and your paper is ready to go. You are a Guardian journalist. I know where you're coming from, so does everybody listening to this conversation. Is it your instinct as a political correspondent that whether you like it or not, the Prime Minister will survive all of this?
It certainly seems like it. We are always very surprised at the situations that Boris Johnson seems to get out of. And it felt like there was such a danger moment at the end of January.
Yes.
And really...
And do you also accept Norman's intriguing point, and that is that with a majority of between 75 and 80, however hard they try, and even if they change their leader, they cannot nail him in the current House of Commons?
Quite possibly. And of course, all of this will depend on the rest of the police investigation. I mean, people were very surprised that Boris Johnson got a fine for this particular event because they thought that it was really the least egregious.
Exactly.
And actually, Anne makes the point about it was just cake. But there was a 100 people invited, bring your own booze garden party in Downing Street. I mean, there are far more egregious examples of parties where we could see that it's very demonstrably untrue that Boris Johnson, when he said in the House of Commons on the 1st of December this year, all guidance was followed in number 10, that is quite a clear mistruth to the House.
And final point to you, again, we've heard both what Norman and what Anne think about it, and you will have seen the David Frost article. I think it was the Telegraph, if I remember rightly, but his point that there is a form of words. He also chucked in saying no more lockdowns as well, but that's Frost's position. There is a form of words that the Prime Minister must utter if he is to satisfy his own party and the public at large. Do you think he'll do that?
Yes, I think he's reformed his operation and he's realised that it's much more helpful for him to become contrite, to show willingness to apologise, because the stonewalling that we saw in December and January was so poisonous and got people's backs up so much. I think he has realised that.
I think he'll say whatever he has to say to stay in office, whatever it is.
Well, I'm going to say one thing to keep you in office, or as it were, metaphorically, on the sofa. I hope that you'll both come back and join me again at 1 o'clock when Anne will have repaired to do whatever Anne is going to be doing with the rest of her day. My thanks to Anne Widdecombe so much for joining us. Anne, it's always a pleasure to see you and to sit down and have a proper chat with you. I remember we did it at the Theatre Royal in Winchester all those years ago. A great pleasure it was. Always a joy to see you. You're welcome any time. And when you come back at 1 o'clock, Edwina Currie will be performing the Tory role, as it were. So lots to look forward to there. But for the time being, Anne, Norman and Aubrey, thank you all very much indeed. I hope you found that both interesting but also enlightening on the state of the opposition, the criticisms of the Rwanda pan, and also the position, as it were, of the Prime Minister. Balanced, informative and authoritative. Thank you all very much indeed. After the break, we'll be getting the very latest details on the Ukraine conflict, and we'll be mulling them over with a former NATO commander, good friend of this programme, good friend of mine, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Don't miss a word of it.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 12:43, which is 17 minutes to 1, I think. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. As promised before the break, we're now going to turn our attentions to Ukraine. And goodness me, it's been a dramatic week. More attacks overnight on Kyiv. Russia says if more border positions are hit in Russia, or actually on the border, there will be even more attacks on Kyiv. A missile factory in Kyiv hit overnight as well, or late yesterday, in retaliation, it is claimed, for the sinking of the Moskva warship, the Black Sea flagship of the Russian Navy. Now, also, former top US General Petraeus and Secretary of State Antony Blinken are both warning this could escalate, and I use this word advisedly, it's the one they both used as well, in an unpredictable way. Well, the Times newspaper goes further, quoting a CIA source who fears that Russia is now ready to use nuclear weapons, and Putin allies are saying it is already the Third World War, a multi-front conflict with the West, they say. Well, joining me now to enlighten all of us, me included, and I hope maybe calm our nerves a wee bit, is Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris, always a pleasure to see you. Can you first of all take, as it were, the strategic temperature for us? It strikes me, I'm an amateur, but it strikes me that it's getting a lot hotter in the last 24 hours.
Well, hi, Alistair. Hi, everyone. I think the strategic temperature in Russia is getting pretty hot. I think that's what we're seeing. And a lot of this huffing and puffing is coming because I think the Russian leadership is under severe pressure, both internally and externally. They're facing the collapse of their economy. Their army has been shown not to be very good. Their navy, of course, now has been shown to have a bit of a problem as well. And I think they're under severe pressure. So what you're seeing is a lot of flailing around, looking for things to intimidate NATO and the West, and also to put pressure on Ukraine by implying that the West will be intimidated away from supporting it.
And do you think, as a military man, that those economic points and trade points that you mentioned in your own analysis add to what Petraeus and Blinken are saying about the unpredictability of the next phase? If Putin remains in power, the country's going broke, the gold reserves are frozen, the oligarchs have turned against him, he is more likely to do something that, putting it quite bluntly, is bonkers.
Well, it may not be bonkers. If you look at it from Putin's point of view, it would be strictly rational. And as a historian, I'd like to draw everybody's attention to what happened when Japan was squeezed very tight, of course, in the Second World War. Because of its actions in China, the United States and every other democratic country really put the pressure on Japan, leading to an oil import ban, if you remember. And in the end, Japan lashed out, attacked Pearl Harbor, and also the Dutch, British and French empires in the Asia-Pacific region. So we've got to be mindful of the fact that they might lash out in order to focus Russian attention on an external threat. This is classic 1984 tactics. And we've got to be wary of that. But I think what Putin has to understand is that whatever he threatens or whatever he does, it will be met with at least an equal and opposite reaction, and possibly even more. You know, if he wants to play big boys games, then I'm afraid the big boys have got to stand up and face him down.
You mentioned the historic analogy with Japan, and very powerfully made. The minute you say Japan and the Second World War, everybody listening to this conversation, Chris, will think of nuclear weapons as well. Mike Jackson on this programme a few weeks back said, "I really cannot rule it out." Do you believe that the unpredictability of the current phase brings chemical and, God forbid, even nuclear weapons back onto the table?
Well, I'm a great believer with Sherlock Holmes that if something is not impossible, it's possible. And so, in theory, it is possible. And I have to say that having watched the atrocities and wars and crimes against humanity that have been committed in Ukraine, I wouldn't put anything past this rogue regime in Russia. It's extensively showing its criminal tendencies. And I'm afraid anything will be on the table if it feels its existential its existence in future is threatened. And that's the regime, not Russia itself.
Do you give, and I'm just reminding folk that you're a Navy man first and foremost, although you know NATO inside out and the Ministry of Defence here in the UK. Do you believe it is possible that the Moskva was sunk by NATO missiles fired perhaps from Romania, as some have suggested, rather than it being Ukrainian weaponry? Because if it's NATO hardware, that's a real escalation.
No, I think the Ukrainians are more than capable of using their Neptune missiles to actually hit that ship. I mean, I think if I were Russian right now, I'd be feeling pretty upset about my Navy and not being able to repel those missiles. They're quite unsophisticated missiles, these Neptune missiles. Ironically, they're essentially a Russian missile that the Ukrainians have developed and not taken on much further. And for a ship of that capacity and capability not to be able to knock down those missiles is a pretty shocking indictment of the state of maintenance, of the state of training in that ship. I don't think, Alistair, they were NATO missiles. The Russians have the capability to have tracked where they came from if necessary. I have no doubt they came off the shoreline at Kiev, and they were Neptune missiles made in Ukraine. And in fact, the Russians bombed the factory the day after where these missiles are put together.
Yeah, which in itself is an action that would seem to confirm that's their theory as well. One final point, and we've talked about this on the programme before, the divisions of opinion within NATO of how much hardware can be sent to Ukraine, how much money various people are prepared to spend. The Germans have come much more on side than they were, let us say, a month ago. But the Kremlin is now saying, and the Americans are clearly taking it seriously, that if we re-equip Ukraine facing that onslaught in the southeast, then that will up the ante and all of those supply chains will become reasonable targets for Russia. That strikes me as being very worrying as well, Chris.
Well, absolutely. But at the end of the day, we can't allow essentially this criminal regime to conduct crimes against humanity to the extent they are right now, even as international players, let alone a defense alliance. And I'm afraid Putin's bluff has got to be called here. We're going to continue to resupply, and we must resupply. And going back, a historical analogy again, let's go back to the Spanish Civil War. Both sides were sort of supplied in that war. The supply chains did come under attack, and those attacks were dealt with in our case. In fact, I remember the Royal Navy was actually sort of making sure that the supplies got through in some cases. But let's be in no doubt, we've got a democratic country under severe threat and also having crimes against humanity committed in it by a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And this is on a scale with the Korean War in 1950. And we, in the free world, really owe it to the Ukrainians to give them our full support and face down this dictator in the Kremlin.
Final quick one, because we were talking at the top of the programme with political people and journalistic people about the Rwanda plan, but you're the Navy man on the show, and I must just quickly ask you, when the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister said, we're delighted to announce that the Royal Navy will now be much more up front and centre in policing the channel to stop these boats bringing folk across, will the current leadership of the Royal Navy have embraced that with keenness, or will it be a bit of an imposition at a busy time?
Yeah, it's a good question, Alistair. I think what we have to recognise is that most of the Navy is geared towards deterring aggression and coercion by autocratic powers. So our aircraft carriers, assault ships, nuclear submarines are based in that area. But our patrol vessels, and the ones that are being used are the small patrol vessels. They will be put in. They will be part of their normal routine. One of the things I've argued for is that we really need a single offshore authority for our economic zone. At the moment, it's split between several agencies, and part of the problem with this is that one looks for drug smugglers, another looks for illegal immigrants, another looks for regulation. We've got to bring this all together. And the one thing the Royal Navy will bring is the command and control to coordinate all these agencies and all the technologies that are needed to both detect and intercept these boats. It's what we do all the time. If you think about the exclusion zone around the Falklands 40 years ago, it's about finding out what's in there, identifying what they are, and then intercepting them if necessary. It's a job the Navy does. They're happy to coordinate with other agencies. And I have to tell you, for junior officers and crews, it's fantastic training to be at sea doing that sort of job.
I remember similar things being said at the height of the Cod War as well. The senior service ready to serve. Chris, genuinely a pleasure. Thank you for finding so much of your time to spend with us this Saturday afternoon, and keep in touch. It's always a really enlightening pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander and former Minister of Defence Director General. Now, a lot of that clearly was about Ukraine and what's going on from a military and even political point of view. But I'm delighted to say now, I'm going to change tack but stick with the same theme, if you follow me, because joining me now live from Ukraine is Jack Ross. Jack is the founder of Vans Without Borders. He decided to go to Ukraine to help when he saw the war break out. He spent around a month getting prepared and had aid delivered to him for onward delivery from various organisations, and he purchased a customised minibus that would double up as a place to sleep if needs be, where all bar 6 seats had been removed. Jack, it's great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Ukraine. Can you say safely where specifically you are, or would you rather not?
No, I can say at the moment I'm in an area called Poltava, which until recently was relatively untouched by the war. But last night there were explosions and air raid sirens going off. And actually about 20 minutes ago, there's been sirens too, as Putin's targeting more areas around Ukraine. I think certainly in response to the attack on the Russian warship. We're in Kharkiv yesterday as well, dropping off essential aid to vulnerable people, particularly elderly people. And it was a real experience, I think. We had explosions going off around us. We could feel the impact of the explosion, like in your teeth rattle as the bombs hit. Again, we had body armor on, and we were asking the locals, why aren't you wearing any protection? Why aren't you running away? And they said they're fed up of running away and hiding in basements, but at night they sleep in the basement. But they wish they had body armor. They wish they had something to defend against the missiles.
Jack, let me just interrupt very briefly, because while you were explaining that about the body armour, what have you, with folk who were listening to this conversation on radio rather than watching on telly, we were showing some pictures of local folk of various age groups, and the joy and relief on their faces is crystal clear. Going to turn that completely on its head and ask what Jack's reaction was when you went to Bucha. We've all heard that word. We know from the media reports and the television and radio reports what it means. You've seen it.
So really, there, I think the most poignant bit, it was obviously shocking, but there's a bit in Bucha where the Ukrainians have gathered up all the vehicles that are burnt out, including Russian tanks. And I think that was the most, would just not experienced something like that before. It's that you get the stench of burnt flesh, I think, going up your nostrils. And you're seeing, cars with children's seats in. You're seeing cars with children written in the front in Ukrainian, all with bullet holes riddled in there. And there is a silver lining in a sense, because some of the locals are returning and they are starting to sweep up the glass and return. But you're seeing, complete blocks of flats destroyed, children's toys burnt to a crisp. And this was a completely unprovoked attack on a civilian area. There was no need for the Russians to hit Bucha. We were told by the Ukrainian army that the Russians went in with tanks, and we could see it. They deliberately swerved out their way to run over cars and decimate the area to try and force the local population into surrendering and to try and break the Ukrainians' morale. We were told that the Russians literally carried out a terrorist attack against the people of Bucha for no other reason than to advance their war.
Extraordinary. Thank you for that. Changing tack to end, as it were, on an up note, because when I read the notes, I was actually moved, not just touched, but moved by it. You specifically went there. One group of people that you particularly wanted to try and help were those who have Down syndrome. And in that process, you also ended up doing a lot of frontline work with children who are in orphanages, tragically a number that is growing by the day.
Yes, so actually today we dropped off aid to a group in Poltava called From Down Syndrome Ukraine, sponsored by Ports of Down Syndrome Association and the National Down Syndrome Policy Group. So we dropped off thousands of pounds worth of humanitarian aid and toys, and we're trying to arrange for them to get some medication. Because while there are some food supplies still left in Ukraine, they're really struggling to get things like ibuprofen, paracetamol, just the basic medical necessities they need for day-to-day life. So we're hopefully arranging for that stuff to come to them as well. We also did help some social orphans. So a big problem at the moment is there are orphans in Ukraine who don't have any paperwork, so they're unable to leave Ukraine, and they don't want to get hoovered up into just sort of the European foster system and potentially never see any of their remaining relatives in Ukraine. So what we did for them is we supplied them with battery packs and some clothing and some toys again as well. And we've actually arranged for them to receive clothes from a group inside Ukraine. So a large part of what we've done is actually help connect up the domestic charities who are all operating independently. But because we've driven the length of Ukraine, we've driven from Lviv to Kharkiv yesterday, And we went to the Russian front line. We drove there, sort of spun around because we said we couldn't hang there too long because there's Russian snipers. And we actually swapped out of our main aid vehicle because we've got a vehicle covered in Ukrainian flags, but we went in locals' cars, and I'm glad we did because we've now seen images that the Russians had targeted yesterday aid workers' vehicles. And I've seen images of vehicles with red crosses on riddled in bullets. And we were told 7 people were killed yesterday who were trying to flee Kharkiv. And I think, we heard the shelling nonstop when we were there. So we heard, unfortunately, people dying just trying to do what we were doing. The war has calmed down a little bit, but it is very much still there. And there is still a major attack on civilians, which is appalling. There's no excuse for attacks on civilians. I can understand army versus army, but from what we've seen, people have had their lives completely devastated for no reason other than terrorism.
Jack, great talking to you. We've got friends on this programme who've gone out there and done similar things to you. From the city, a friend of mine called Andrew, also Christian buddies of mine. It may be getting a little bit crowded occasionally, but if it's crowded with good people like yourself and your colleagues, we are honoured by what you're doing for people who have caused no offence themselves other than to live in Ukraine. Jack Ross, thank you very much indeed. Vans Without Borders, look it up, see what he's doing, and maybe, hey, what, see if you can help. Jack, thank you very much indeed. You take care.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Thank you.
You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. The time is exactly 1:30 but we've plenty more still to come, so do stay with us.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. It's just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next hour I'll be keeping you company here on GB News TV and radio, with plenty more still to come. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 3 minutes past 1. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary have been banned from entering Russia. The country's Foreign Ministry announced that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ben Wallace are all barred, along with 10 other British government members and politicians. They say unprecedented hostile action by the British government, particularly sanctions against senior Russian officials, is the reason behind the move, with further names to be added later. Fresh Russian missile strikes have hit the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and explosions have been heard in the western city of Lviv. It comes as the country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. Efforts are underway to evacuate Ukrainian civilians through 9 humanitarian corridors today. The mayor of Trostyanets says authorities are investigating mass graves in the Sumy area.
We don't have exact information, but a lot of people are missing. Right now, we're trying to find out if they are imprisoned or dead. We are finding mass graves, and it's not clear who dug them. An exhumation will take place. At the moment, there are at least 50 dead. Some of them were just shot on the street. Some were found with tied hands, eyes taped. We found people in villages shot in the head.
The Home Secretary says other countries could follow the UK's Rwanda asylum plan, as it was confirmed that 6,000 people have crossed the Channel so far this year. Priti Patel made the comment despite reports of a civil service backlash over the reforms. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned the plans are in breach of international law. Earlier, the Ministry of Defence confirmed 181 migrants crossed to the UK on 6 boats yesterday. Dr. Greg Mills, a former strategic advisor to the president of Rwanda, says the decision is concerning.
Well, I think it's a highly transactional response to the refugee crisis in the UK, and essentially you're putting the responsibility on another country. It has an appalling human rights record. It ranks with 22 points out of 100, for instance, on Freedom House's index on political freedoms. Which puts it in about the same space as Russia, for instance.
Health officials are warning people not to eat Kinder chocolate linked to a salmonella outbreak in Belgium. 70 people in the UK so far have been affected. An assessment released by the European Food Safety Authority says it matched the same salmonella strain taken from a factory last December. The UK Health Security Agency has issued the alert for Kinder Surprise, Kinder Mini Eggs and Kinder Chocobons. 1 in 7 teachers have experienced sexism at work, with 59% of harassment coming from a pupil. The National Association of Schoolmasters Union of Women Teachers will debate the problem of so-called incel culture in schools at its annual conference in Birmingham. Chair for the Campaign for Real Education, Chris McGovern, told GB News he thinks children need to be held more accountable.
If children cross a line, they know there has to be some sort of punishment, and if necessary, that should be exclusion. No, we can't throw boys onto the scrap heap because they're being misogynist. They've got to be looked after as well. But we do have to protect girls. We have to protect other groups in the school. So really, this is about leadership, and we should throw away some of these liberal ideas about, oh, we're always going to put the child first.
And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will make a televised address at the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games in the Netherlands later on today. It follows visits on Thursday to meet the Queen and the Prince of Wales in Windsor. Harry and Meghan's arrival at the Games marked the couple's first public appearance together in Europe since they quit as senior working royals more than 2 years ago. Royal commentator Ingrid Seward told GB News it could be the first step in rebuilding their relationship with the royal family.
Whatever you might think of Harry and Meghan, we all rather hope so that the family will embrace them again. But I'm not sure about Prince William. I think that probably goes a bit deeper. And I know that Prince Charles is very hurt, but it's his son. It wasn't like we imagine a sort of long meeting. I would think it was an exchange of pleasantries, because that's the royal way, but with the undertone of mending bridges.
On TV, on radio and online, this is GB News. We'll be back after this.
It is 8 minutes past 1, and this is indeed GB News TV and radio. We'll be bringing you more news as it happens. We'll be going back to Ray for a final bulletin at about 1:30. But now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends, and I'm absolutely delighted that I'll be with you until 2 o'clock, keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests, or at least I hope so anyway. Still to come this afternoon, we will be continuing to examine the controversy surrounding the government's plans to send asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. But what are the alternative solutions and who, if anyone, is voicing them? We'll discuss the latest developments in Ukraine after Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other senior ministers were banned from entering Russia over the UK's hostile attitude. And Partygate seems to be rolling on, with reports that the Prime Minister has been airbrushed out of leaflets for the local elections as polling finds 2/3 of Brits think he should resign if he's issued with more fines. As always, I want to hear from you. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We are also on Twitter, as indeed am I, and on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for previous programmes and keeping you right up to date with everything that is going on here. We're on YouTube. You can subscribe to that channel under the name GB News. And I'm delighted to be joined still by the former Lib Dem Home Office Minister, Norman Lamb, who's sitting there.
Norman Bacon.
Did I say Norman Lamb?
You did.
How dare I have said that? Norman Bacon.
Up for years, don't worry about it.
Norman Lamb is up in Norfolk somewhere. He's down in Lewis on the south coast. Sorry about that. Also joining me in just a moment will be Edwina Currie, former Tory minister, and here in the studio with me, Guardian political correspondent Aubrey, to consider the situation and continue our conversation that we began at 12 o'clock. Let me start off, first of all, if I may, with Edwina. Are you there, my dear? Hello. Good to see you, and great that you've been able to join us. We had the pleasure of the company of Anne Widdecombe at the top of the hour. We talked a lot about the Rwanda plan, some of the detail, but more about the criticism of it. In your view, as a former minister, but also someone who sat on the Tory benches both in government and in opposition, do you believe that oppositions have to come up with a constructive alternative, or is it good enough for them just to pick holes in what the government of the day are proposing?
Well, it depends what the voters think. I mean, the first objective of this Rwanda idea is already being achieved in that far fewer people are now risking their lives coming across the channel. It's had that effect in a matter of days, and that has to be a good thing because they're perfectly safe in France, and that's where they should be applying for asylum. They don't have to come to the UK. But the voters may take a dim view of an opposition that merely carps and doesn't come up with an alternative suggestion. The only alternative I've heard really from Labour and Lib Dems is let them all in. And that doesn't play down very well with large parts of the electorate in this country.
Well, that's a ludicrous description of Lib Dem policy and probably of Labour policy as well. It's not let them all in. The policy, which I believe in, is one where people internationally are allowed to claim asylum when they arrive at a country. They then have that determined. If they are genuine refugees, they can stay. If they can't, they're removed. And let's get this in perspective. 0.2% of the world's refugees come here. 0.2% only, 1 in every 500. This is not the issue which people are making it out to be. And also the policy from the government of sending out Royal Navy boats. What are they doing? They're acting as beacons to people coming across the channel, because when they see the Royal Navy boat, they go up to it and they'll be saying, OK, well, we'll now be taken to land. I mean, Royal Navy boats could do nothing apart from escort people to the shore.
That was a good, tough exchange there between Edwina and Norman, but they use it as a political correspondent. Edwina Currie can make that point that, oh, it's just open borders, let them all in, because historically that was Labour's position, and the public perception that you report on professionally and I comment on professionally is that Edwina Currie's right.
Well, we might find that the public perception shifts as the policy is implemented. I mean, so many of the concerns about what happens in Australia...
One step back. Edwina Currie is saying the public perception is that the Lib Dems would just throw the borders wide open and Labour would just throw the borders wide open. That is the public perception of the opposition party's positions on immigration.
But it obviously isn't true. I mean, just because you're in the European Union doesn't mean that you have an open borders policy to the entire world. You were talking about a group of 27 countries, so I'm not sure open borders is the exact right way to characterise it. But yeah, people's perception of this policy will change and be shaped by how it's implemented, all the details that we'll see. When we see the pictures of those people being loaded onto planes and the potentially harrowing details that we're warned about might actually occur once people who have gone all across the world to come to the UK and then been transported to Rwanda, all of those issues that people are concerned about might be repeated that we've seen in Australia. We might find that the public perception shifts again. So we shouldn't take this as a completely static picture of what the public thinks about this issue.
Question to both Edwina and to Norman. Edwina first. I was chatting to an old friend of mine, actually both of you know him, but no names, no pack drill, because it's slightly sensitive, who said, what you've got to understand, Alistair, and trying to get your head round this, is that the Home Office historically exists to stop people coming here. That is perceived as being the fundamental job of the Home Office. Full stop, move on. Edwina Curry?
Yes, indeed. My grandparents came to the United Kingdom in the 1890s as children. And by 1905, that was exactly what happened. There was a huge piece of legislation that stopped people coming in. One of the key things we have to do is make a distinction between refugees and economic migrants.
Yes.
I mean, in this area where I live in the Peak District, we're welcoming 6 families from Ukraine over the next few days, and they will be made extremely welcome, and everyone will pull out all the stops to assist them. The people that are coming in the boats are mostly male, mostly young, nearly all economic migrants, often from quite well-off families, paying £6,000, £7,000, £20,000 to get them here. And the feeling in the UK is actually they shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing this. There are routes for legal migration, particularly from the Commonwealth and indeed from other countries. And those are the people that we need. The people we don't need are the ones who get into a boat, drop the passport, and then come here and claim that they're something that they're not.
Yeah. Fascinating. Norman, you were nodding your head in agreement with a lot of what Edwina said.
Yes, I took
why can't Ed Davies say it as well, then?
Well, let me tell you what I agree with, first of all.
OK.
Look, Edwina's right. We separate out the difference between people who are genuine refugees and economic migrants. But that doesn't mean that people who arrive here are automatically illegal. They're not. They arrive here, and the issue is the Home Office should process them quickly, determine whether they're genuine refugees, like the ones that Edwina's talking about being welcomed, because that's quite right, and if they're not proper refugees who were economic migrants, they should be returned. It's as simple as that. That's how it should work. And the problem has been that the Home Office, as you said at the beginning, Alistair, has had a policy of rejecting almost everybody they can. And the reason they take such a long time to determine whether someone's a refugee, I think, is to deliberate, to try and keep them in limbo for a long period of time. As a deterrent, that's what they do. We should process these people quickly. Those who are refugees should be allowed to incorporate themselves into the country. Those who aren't should be returned. And if that was done quickly, some of this would go away.
Yes. Intriguing. Again, bring you back in on this, because you were listening carefully to what Edwina was saying, and you were here at the top of the hour when you were hearing Anne Widdecombe making very, very similar points. Does it not surprise you that actually there is common ground between people who politically are not quite polar opposites, but certainly very, very different wings of British politics? There's constructive, intelligent common ground we never hear about.
We should.
Never in The Guardian, never in The Independent.
It absolutely is. But, I mean, obviously, this is a really nuanced situation, isn't it? We saw with the Homes for Ukrainians refugee resettlement programme that there were 200,000 people who offered to open up their homes to those people fleeing war and destitution. People do have sympathy for refugees and people who are fleeing these conflicts. It's just that they don't see it as much because it's not, everyone's focus right at the moment, rightly, is on Ukraine. But the other war zones that these people are fleeing, the conflict, that those situations are equally as harrowing. And so I hope that people will see the nuance in this and that there is an attempt really to just help people.
Sure. Edwina, let me bring you back in, if I may, because I'm scouring it through. Andrew Mitchell, I thought, made the most potent criticism of Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. And obviously he's on the same side of the House as you, and we know where he's coming from politically. But it was very crisp. It's clarified today that the civil servants in the Home Office were not seeking to block this plan in principle. Priti had to issue a ministerial directive, i.e. get in there and do it, because their concerns were that it was not cost effective. That is a very un-Tory thing to support, Edwina.
Hey, listen, Alistair, it's all about politics. This has nothing to do with what it costs or whether it's it's cost effective. I mean, you could say that about the entire green policy, if you like. This is about politics. It could be about trying to influence the local elections, which are happening in many areas, not in the area where I live, we haven't got any. But it's much more likely to be about influencing the outcome of the general election in 2024. And why do I say that? Cast your mind back to the last Labour government when they were campaigning in 2010, and a lady comes up to Gordon Brown, who was then the Prime Minister, and she says something about sorting out immigration and so on, and he calls her a bigoted woman. And immigration has been one of the fault lines in British politics now for quite a long time. I think that's behind what is going on. Priti Patel and Boris Johnson are politicians to their fingertips. Do I sound cynical about it? Oh, yeah. I mean, I was a campaigner for Remain back in the day, but we have moved on, and that's what we're doing.
Sure. But does it surprise you, and I take your point, it's entirely a matter for you to say that it's a bit cynical, and I did ask Anne whether she thought the timing was a bit, and Anne said, I've been banging on for this for 20 years, and they finally got around to doing it. But both of you, as loyal Conservatives, one of the things you're supposed to stand for is value for money for the taxpayers. And I'm hearing Anne Widdecombe and Edwina Currie say, look, it's a bit of a stunt on the timing. We're finally getting around to doing it. But I hear Andrew Mitchell, who I know and respect very well from his overseas aid and development days, saying this is not value for money. It's a waste of taxpayers' money.
Yeah, an awful lot of things are a waste of taxpayers' money, like helping out and giving money to business during the pandemic, all sorts of things. That was another example of where a ministerial directive had to be given, where the minister simply said, just do it. We'll sort out the money later. The idea that you can only ever do things that are value for money is an idea that you can always predict the future. I mean, let me give you a slightly different scenario. Supposing this thing actually works, Rwanda is a country which has a majority of women in its population because of the horrible things that happened during the civil war over 25 years ago. They have a majority of women in their parliament. They are a modern and progressive country. They're trying very hard to expand and develop, and they need more people. They're looking for people to come to their country, not to leave. I think that could actually be extremely helpful. And that's one of the things that we do with foreign aid. So, it'd be very interesting to see if this does actually pan out. Personally, I think what it'll do is it'll cut off a lot of the illegal immigration that's coming across the channel, and the government will then claim a success, and then they will be winning elections.
Yeah. Do you accept what Edwina's saying there about Rwanda? Because there have been reams and reams of stuff written about how terrifying this place is, harking back to the days of genocide and internecine strife. And I tweeted a couple of days ago saying it's intriguing that the government of Rwanda are clearly seeing this as, in effect, a new industry. And Priti Patel this morning said, I think other countries will follow. You've looked at Rwanda, and you've heard what Edwina Currie just said there.
Well, one of the main issues when I spoke to Conservative MPs when the policy was announced was they were like, is this the right place?
Yeah.
Partly the human rights issues, but also, I mean, obviously in Britain, we do actually take Rwandan refugees, people who have fled that country because they face persecution. The Foreign Office's own website says that LGBTQ plus people there face hostility, not because of any laws, but because it's sort of ingrained into the sort of country. So I'm not 100% sure it's the safest place.
Funnily enough, I mean, but also it doesn't stop either Liz Truss or the Prime Minister going to Saudi Arabia to cut a deal to fill in. Do you accept any of what Edwina was just saying about Rwanda?
Well, I accept one point, which is that this is a cynical ploy by the Prime Minister ahead of the local elections to play the immigration card. No, so I had to get that one in, Alistair. No, I don't necessarily. I mean, Rwanda's got a very poor human rights record. We are, as you just heard, receiving refugees here who are proven to be in danger of torture all their lives from Rwanda, and we're sending other people over there. This is inhumane. Actually, do you know something? I'm ashamed to be British with this policy. I really am.
Edwina, one thing that struck me as well that lacked clarity, and throughout your political career, and you and I have known each other for a long, long time, is that you've never been backward in coming forward on clarity, even if whether it's eggs and putting the fear of God into people, but you've always been straight down the line. It did strike me that there was quite a lack of clarity in what Priti Patel announced when she was down in Rwanda itself and the Prime Minister at that air base in Kent. One simple standout line is if you're scooped up on the shore of Kent and whisked away to Rwanda and fail to qualify there, you either go back to where you came from. At no point do you come here.
You got it. You got the point, Alistair. You got it entirely. And having some of the details a little obscure is fine. Because the key thing about this that's being talked about now all over the world is Rwanda. And that will have the effect on people wanting to come here. Incidentally, the United Kingdom has a long history of suggesting that people that aren't wanted here, in inverted commas, should go to somewhere else.
No, but with respect, that's why I came back to that question, because you yourself said a moment ago, you and your family wouldn't be here were it not for open hearts and open minds. Half the cabinet wouldn't be in this country if it were not for a similar policy. We've reneged on that policy in the context of Rwanda, and that, I think, does trouble quite a few folk.
It may do, but the opposition, the objection to a lot of people coming in here is also very profound. It's all right for us. We're educated people. Nobody's pushing us out of a job, or we don't feel that anybody can push us out of a job. That's not the case for a great many other people in this country, and they all have votes. The United Kingdom has a long history of suggesting that people it doesn't want should go to somewhere in Africa. Immediately after the war, when hundreds of thousands of Jewish people were liberated from the camps and wanted to go to Israel, to Palestine, which was a British protectorate, the government of the time, which was a Labour government, seriously suggested they should go to Uganda and that they would arrange it. And that's a memory that's burned into I come from a Jewish background, it's burned into our memory as well, because our reaction was, you've got to be joking, the homeland is Israel, and that's where people want. But it's not about what the refugees want. It's actually not about what liberal-minded people and good people in this country want. It's to do, as Norman has just said, it's a cynical political ploy, a lot of it. And it's because it plays into a meme that the government hopes will be successful. And perhaps Priti Patel particularly is leading the charge.
Norman is champing at the bit.
Well, I'm not champing at the bit, but I want to come back to your point about value for money, because what Andrew Mitchell, who I also respect a great deal, by the way, and he and I share the record of being stopped by police trying to wheel a bicycle into Downing Street. But Andrew Mitchell has said that when he examined this, it would have been cheaper to put these people up on the Ritz. That's what he said, rather than export them, because that's what it is, export them to Rwanda. And these ministerial decisions which are taken against civil service advice, directions which are issued, directives. There's been 2 in the Home Office only in the last 30 years. This is the second one. This is quite a big thing. The civil service doesn't take these decisions lightly to say, sorry, Minister, we're not doing that. They've got a real concern about the value for money and the whole process of that. Not about the rights and wrongs of the policy, that's not their job, but about the cost of it and the way it's being implemented.
Edwina?
Norman, I'm sure you would agree with me that the Home Office Civil Service have not exactly covered themselves with glory.
I do agree with that.
Ukraine refugees. I mean, they are, I won't put the word bloody in there, but there's something useless, right? And to have a senior minister, a Home Office minister, actually saying to them, you will do this because I said so, and I will take responsibility for it, and I will defend this policy, and let's see how it plays out. I think that's good. I hope it works. I hope it works and that it benefits Rwanda. I do a bit of work, not in Rwanda, but in another very poor African country. And it would be a joy to see people coming into that country where they could actually bring some energy and drive and health and to see the economy of that country improving. If it works for Rwanda, it might actually be a very good template for the future.
All right, we're coming up towards 1:30, and I'm going to throw a final question to you, Edwina, and Aubrey and Norman, do feel free to come back upon it, but we've kind of half discussed it already. Whether one is a Conservative, Labour Party supporter or Liberal Democrat, all of us in this conversation care passionately about our democracy, and good democracy works when you have strong and powerful opposition. You've been around a while, Edwina. I'm not impressed at the moment by the policy critique of the opposition or the fresh ideas and the challenge. Is it as bad as you've seen, or have we seen worse? I just should point out that Anne Widdecombe said earlier on, I remember Michael Foot as well, who was a great intellect, but perhaps not politically that astute. Have you seen it as bad as this before?
Oh, it's been a lot worse. It was a lot worse under Jeremy Corbyn. A nasty piece of work. The anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was an absolute shameful disgrace. Indeed, if he had been the Prime Minister of this country, he would not be being banned by Russia from visiting. He would be a welcome guest. And it's not that long ago since he very nearly became Prime Minister of the country. So I think Keir Starmer is doing a good job, as Neil Kinnock did, in clearing out some of the unpleasant cockroaches at the back of their cupboard. But he's got a long way to go to be appealing to the British people. And one of the key things he's got to remember is not everybody lives in North London. Not everybody is heart on sleeve, virtue signalling liberal. A lot of people actually have to work for a living. And they live in many of the northern towns, places that were neglected by the Labour Party when they were in government for very many years. I live in a red wall, blue wall seat with a majority of 580. And we have every hope that we might actually put a nought on the end of that and have a good majority next time. That's what good government is also about. And we have to hope that the Labour Party continues to be as bland and as bloodless as it is at the moment.
The authentic voice of the North and Derbyshire, Edwina Currie, always a joy to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Final word to you two, and only because we then must move on, but my huge thanks to Edwina. Informative, thoughtful, provocative as well, which you responded to very constructively. The key point she makes, and I'd love your comment upon it as a journalist, as a reporter, is that the biggest danger for opposition parties, and she did highlight Labour more than the Liberal Democrats, is being out of touch with the majority of ordinary folk, not least behind the wall. Seats like Bishop Auckland, which my good friend Deanna Davison, who works here occasionally as well, now represents, unimaginable 20 years ago. Is she right that Labour just haven't read the room?
Well, they've got to piece together a really broad coalition, haven't they? The election is 1-2 years away, so you can sort of understand why Labour is holding back and waiting to announce a lot of the policies that we'll probably start to hear a lot closer to that election, because it doesn't want the Conservatives to steal them all, as they have done before. But I think Keir Starmer is very, very mindful of wanting to try and pick back those red wall constituencies, trying not to upset the apple cart, but sometimes that comes across as being
by saying very little
or being a bit too hesitant. And so he actually then faces the problem of then not looking terribly principled. Yeah. And people sort of respect more if they know exactly what you stand for, but disagree.
Final point to you is one thing that struck me that I genuinely didn't expect. And I know you well, and I know Anne and Edwina, and we all lived through the coalition. There was a lot more, apart from the difference between a genuine asylum-seeking, in fear of my life refugee and those who are just looking for a better economic deal. There was a lot more in common twixt your position and those two women than I expected. Did that surprise you?
Not really. I mean, because things are not always framed in the way that brings these common views out. They're framed in rather antagonistic ways. But can I just respond lastly to the point about where the election's going? Because I think that's very interesting. You know, it's perfectly true that Labour has to marry the Islington set, if you like, with the red wall seats, and that's quite a challenge for them. But hey, it's a challenge for the Tories as well, because they've got to marry the red wall seats they want to hold on to with the traditional Tories in the south, who are not happy with things. Look at what happened in North Shropshire, Cheshire and Amersham when they lost these by-election to the Lib Dems. They've got to worry about the blue wall as well as the red wall.
Right, OK. Norman and Aubrey and Edwina up in Derbyshire, thank you all very much indeed. It delivered exactly what I hoped it would do, which was a thoughtful critique with a bit of fireworks here and there as well on Rwanda and the state of government and opposition. Thank you all very much. Both welcome anytime. Plenty more still to come in the last 28 minutes of Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be continuing this conversational elements of it with another good friend of mine and a senior figure from the Labour Party. But first of all, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 35 minutes past 1. I'm Ray Addison with your latest news update. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary have been banned from entering Russia. The country's foreign ministry announced that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ben Wallace are all barred, along with 10 other British government members and politicians. They say hostile sanctions against senior Russian officials is the reason behind the move. Fresh Russian missile strikes have hit the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and explosions have been heard in the western city of Lviv. Ukrainian defense officials also say fighting is continuing in the southern besieged city of Mariupol. It comes as the country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. The Home Secretary says other countries could follow the UK's Rwanda asylum plan, as it was confirmed that 6,000 people have crossed the channel so far this year. Priti Patel made the comment despite reports of a civil service backlash over the reforms. There's also been warnings from the United Nations Refugee Agency that the plans breach international law. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will make a televised address at the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games in the Netherlands later today. It follows visits on Thursday to meet the Queen and the Prince of Wales in Windsor. Harry and Meghan's arrival at the Games marked the couple's first public appearance together in Europe since they quit as senior working royals. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. Welcome back. The time is 1:37, 13 minutes to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. We've been spending the last hour and a half discussing the main issues of the day with terrific Conservative, Liberal Democrat voices and also top journalist as well from the Guardian newspaper. The peg really is Rwanda and, to a lesser extent, Ukraine. But what I really wanted to try and drill into was whether or not the opposition to this government, and I'm not saying you are opposed to it or support it, doesn't matter. But my view of a democracy is that you've got to have a vibrant, thoughtful, imaginative opposition as well as a government that seems at least to know what it's up to. That was our principal theme, and Anne Widdecombe, Edwina Currie and Norman were all absolutely brilliant upon that. That's two Tories and a Liberal Democrat. So I'm absolutely delighted now to be able to hear from a former Labour stalwart, the former Member of Parliament, John Mann, now Lord John Mann. John, good of you to join us this Saturday afternoon, and thank you very much indeed. On Rwanda, my peg, and I think that my team told you this, my peg really was that simply to dismiss Boris Johnson and Priti Patel's plans as inhumane and insensitive was not enough and didn't reflect what was a genuine concern out in the country. What's your view?
It's certainly not enough for the opposition parties and for the Labour Party. I think the interesting question is going to be that this may now force the Labour Party to determine what its immigration policy is. And that could, ironically, be quite helpful for the Labour Party at the next election, because the immigration will be an issue. It will be a significant issue in winning back the so-called red wall seats. And I think the government will get a bit of a short-term boost by this, because the general view that I pick up is people saying, well, do something. Well, they've done something. However, in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, I don't quite see how this policy will solve that dilemma, because if it's, as I keep reading, 500 places, people who can go to Rwanda, but in the height of summer, we'll be seeing 500 a day on boats coming through. And so I'm not sure that this actually works as a policy. It kind of...
Let me just butt in on that, John, because...
Is that it?
Yeah. And talking to Edwina Currie and Anne Widdecombe, for the Tory side, both they, not quite as sharply as Andrew Mitchell, but they, as Tories, said, there are bits here and there that will work in progress and we'll have to come back to it. But I want to grab something you said at the beginning of that answer, because it's utterly crucial. For the Labour Party, and Edwina Currie took us through the Corbyn era, and Anne Widdecombe took us back to the Michael Foot era, there was a pre-Blair Brown view that open borders, in effect, was progressive, internationalist, it's everything that Labour should stand for, without realising that the penny had dropped amongst the Brits, that was not their collective view, nor their majority view.
And it also didn't define what open borders meant. Open borders were open borders from the European Union, not the rest of the world. And so it was quite easy to have, it might be quite a lazy policy then on immigration. Now it's not possible. And I think if the clever thing and the appropriate thing for Labour to do would be to now work through and outline an immigration policy, because I think governments are fearful of doing that because they want flexibility. I think it creates an opportunity for the Labour Party if they choose to do it. If they don't, then I think this, however much people attack this kind of policy, I think it will resonate if there's no alternative. But I do think perhaps the biggest interesting question, this now I think forces Labour's hand, not in the next week or two, but this year, to have an immigration policy. If that does happen, that absolutely plays into Labour's hands. It'd be good for the country, but it'd be very good for Labour's electoral prospects.
Yes. But you and I also, I agree with that 100%, incidentally, and that, not whether I'm pro-Labour, Tory, or the rest of it. You know perfectly well that I'm not any of those things anyway, but I love a good argument. But to me, as a Democrat, a thoughtful, constructive opposition is crucial. And not only is the door ajar, and I'll tell you for why, because I know you have your own views, but getting on for 85% of the people who were polled by Savanta for the Daily Mail, and forget that it's the Daily Mail, doesn't matter who published it, but they find that getting on for 85% of people say you need to have a distinction between those people who are literally running for their lives scared and those who simply reckon they're on for a better economic hit in this country. The party that articulates that is the party that picks up votes.
Absolutely, and because that's seen as government, and it is government. And if it's done well, it's good government and good governance. And so, you know, I hope that the Labour Party actually develops an effective policy. And I think if it does, it will find that the trade unions will be very happy to vote it through at a Labour Party conference. I don't think they'll be up making big speeches on it, but they won't vote against it because they know what union members think. And so, you know, the timing, I think, is probably not as smart politically as it could be in terms of what the government's done, because it does give the Labour Party quite a good lead-in time now to get its act together. Whether it does, of course, it's going to be pretty fundamental to who wins the next election.
And absolutely intriguing. And the bit about jobs, people were reminding me, I was having an exchange with quite a few friends last night, not least Mark Seddon, who used to edit Tribune magazine, as you well remember upon that. And I was reminded that people like Bob Crow, not a middle ground or right-wing cell in his body, was very much on the line that led Gordon Brown eventually to say, you know, British jobs for British workers. It has been an absolute mess over the years. And have you got the leadership, as you look at it, as a very experienced an objective assessor of these matters, do you believe that there is the leadership now in place that could clutch that thorn and that challenge that you've outlined, whether it is Sir Keir himself or Yvette Cooper? Are the right people there leading the opposition?
Well, they've got the intellect to understand these issues. They've got the data there. So the question is, have they got the bottle? And time will tell. I don't make any predictions on that. But I do think this is, rather ironically, this is rather a big opportunity for the Labour Party, because to win back the seats that Labour have lost will require a fair and coherent immigration policy. And there isn't a policy there yet. There needs to be. But the government doesn't have a very clear immigration policy either. And therefore, that's why I say this is potentially an opportunity. And, you know, I lay no odds on whether Keir Starmer or Yvette Cooper will do it. But the prize is pretty big, because that's what voters in seats like the one that I used to represent want to be hearing from the Labour Party. And that's what will be required for those votes to shift back. That's absolutely certain.
Absolutely fascinating. John, always a pleasure to talk to you, whether it's standing there waiting for an old friend in the lobby of the House of Lords a couple of weeks ago or now on GB News. Genuinely a pleasure. You're welcome on this programme anytime. Thank you very much indeed. That's John Mann,
Cheers,
Lord Mann, former Labour Member of Parliament and now sitting in the House of Lords, saying that there is the potential there of something of an open goal for Labour to really think through what it does want to offer you, the people who will determine those elections in May and the general election come the time. But at the moment, he said, Labour do not have a clear policy on immigration. Now is the time for them to take a deep breath and craft one. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, and we've plenty more still to come in the last 15-20 minutes of the programme. So stay with us. See you in a few moments.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 11 minutes to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. My next guest is Martin Campbell, who's the former chief advisor to Ofcom and now media advisor with the consultancy company Media Objectives. Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed. There he is, for joining us this afternoon. We've been talking a little earlier on about Rwanda and the role of the opposition parties in coming up with a clear-cut alternative. And I wove into it the idea that the media basically did not give the government policy a particularly fair hearing, and everybody was kind of going along with it being inhumane, horrible, and the rest of it. When you sit back and look at that, do you think really impartiality in the media, because the papers can do whatever they want to do, remains a troubling work in progress?
Alistair, I despair as far as news impartiality is concerned. And I think it's a real shame when you have people like Robert Peston doing tweets. I don't know if they were 2 o'clock in the morning tweets, were they? You know, about Boris being an elected dictator and this sort of thing. But what I can't get my head round, because maybe I'm just too old school, but what I can't get my head round is why privileged broadcasters like the BBC and like ITV and so on want to wallow around in the swamp of social media comments. I mean, Ofcom can't investigate social media comments for impartiality yet. There is an online safety bill going through, as you know, through the Commons. Maybe that will evolve into impartiality at one stage. But yeah, they're saying, oh no, we can't do anything about it because it wasn't said on air. But I mean, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. And I think the Peston thing in particular does show where we're at with news impartiality. And when there is so much confusion about, you know, what should have a tick and what should not, you know, ITV should be taking Peston aside and, you know, pinning him up against the wall, because to me, this is really just not on. It's going to see the BBC and ITV just sail down the river with loads of other channels.
One of the things that I made clear in my earlier conversation, and Aubrey Allegretti was here from The Guardian, very thoughtful, very intelligent young guy talking about it, was the fact that I celebrate I've been a broadcast hack all my life, never in print, apart from when people kind enough to ask me to write about my grandchildren, whatever it might be. And I celebrate the fact that The Guardian, The Independent, and the rest of them can say whatever they want, as long as it's within the law and doesn't libel people and the rest of it. But broadcast media under Ofcom should be a beacon of impartiality, a go-to. Just give me the facts and I'll make my own mind up. When did that stop?
It stopped, I think, actually, with, I'm not obsessed with social media, but I think it stopped when social media and, for want of a better word, mainstream media sort of collided. Because, I'm like you, I'm an old hack, and many years ago I used to teach journalists, many of whom are on national stations now. And impartiality was the biggest thing that I could teach them. And the fact of the matter is, it's not easy to be impartial when you're a reporter. It's easy to be partial.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to be impartial. And what we've lost, I think, Alistair, is there are effectively two ways of presenting news. There's news presentation, which I think should be giving people facts and letting them take them away and sort them out for themselves. Yeah. And then there's news programming, much like your own here and Nigel's show and so on, where lots of different views are put. But political editors, and I know there's been quite a fuss over Laura Kuenssberg and Peston as well. I mean, they've both got... They both come in for problems over tweeting in the past. Political editors are an input to the news presentation side. And no way should we be having news presented to us by someone who we know thinks this, because clearly it's not an impartial presentation. And the whole celebrity thing works this way as well, with the way Peston puts his programme together, sort of throwing his arms around and screaming and and tweeting and so on. It really does bother me that no one is doing anything about this. I blame the BBC in many respects, actually, because they could have done something about this a long time ago.
Tim Davies, when he took over as Director General, said he would, and asked Richard Sambrook to help him guide him through the social media work in progress. Final question. Does the appointment of Michael Grade as chair of Ofcom in this specific context give you any optimism?
Well, only insofar as I think, it would be the same as you or I, an old hack who knows about these things, putting in some experience, because I think there are too many people who don't understand news impartiality, and Michael certainly does. I mean, I have some sympathy with the people who say, well, he's an analog chairman for a digital age, but he has experience, and hopefully he can put some common sense in there. But it's the channels themselves that have to act.
Martin Campbell, pleasure to talk to you, and let's do it again. So much more we didn't have time for as we inch towards the top of the hour. But for the time being, thank you, sir, and stay in touch.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Now, it is, of course, the bank holiday weekend, and Brits have been travelling across the country, where they've been able to make the most of the Easter break, including at Skegness, Skeggy, where our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us. And I am deeply envious. I love Skegness. How is it? I mean, it looks great. You can feel it, breathe it.
Good afternoon.
How is it, Will?
Yeah, you can see it. Beautiful, bright blue skies, lots of people here. Estimates of around 100,000 people a day are going to be visiting this part of the East Lincolnshire coastline. Of course, we're talking about travel. 22 million car journeys expected to take place over this Easter bank holiday. 3.6 million of them are going to be taking place today alone. A really busy day yesterday as well, but you can understand why, because pent-up demand, 2 years of the pandemic, has meant that people aren't able to do this for such a long time. So you can see why people are out there enjoying the sunshine, and they're happy to spend the money, even if there is a problem with petrol, even if there is very costly prices at the moment. People are very happy to come down to Skegness.
Absolutely brilliant, Will, and a lovely big crowd there over your shoulder. Keep in touch. They'll be coming to you again later on in the afternoon, but that is all we'd have time for on this programme today. I will, of course, be back at noon tomorrow. Until then, a very good afternoon to you.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking sunny and warm for most, with a few coastal locations hanging on to cloud. Let's take a look at the details. For Plymouth and southwest England, it will be a warm and sunny afternoon, although some low cloud is likely to persist along windward coast in Cornwall, highs of 12 to 20 Celsius. Another warm and sunny afternoon for London and the southeast, although temperatures are not likely to be as high as they were on Friday afternoon. The afternoon will see some fair weather cloud bubble up across South Wales, but there'll also be plenty of warm sunshine to hand. Overall,